The quaint little gift shop was a hive of activity, its narrow aisles teeming with last-minute shoppers. The air was thick with the scent of scented candles and fresh stationery. I was there too, meandering through the shelves, my eyes skimming over quirky mugs and vintage clocks, searching for a unique keepsake. That's when I noticed him, a lone figure amidst the chaos, looking utterly perplexed and out of his element. He was standing in front of the greeting cards, flipping a card open and then snapping it shut, his brows knitted in concentration. A small, peculiar trinket dangled from his other hand. He seemed to be debating with himself, lost in a world of indecision. I couldn't resist. I took a few steps towards him and said, "Can't make up your mind?" He looked up, slightly startled by the intrusion. His eyes, a deep shade of brown, met mine, and for a moment, he seemed to forget his predicament. "Oh, hi. Yeah, I'm in a bit of a bind here." "I'm James," he said, offering a hand. "I'm Anna," I replied, shaking his hand. It was a firm handshake, confident yet inviting. "Nice to meet you, Anna. I'm on a mission to find the perfect birthday gift for my mom, but I seem to be circling around these two," he confessed, holding up the card and the trinket for me to see. The card was bright and colorful, with a humorous quip on the front. The trinket, on the other hand, was a small, intricately designed figurine, delicate and refined. I chuckled. "Well, they're quite different. What's your mom like? Maybe I can help you choose." James's face lit up with a grateful smile. "That would be amazing, thank you. My mom, she's incredible. She's got this sharp wit but also appreciates the finer things. She's been my rock, you know?" As he spoke about his mother, his respect and love for her were palpable. It was touching to see a son speak so fondly of his mother. "Well, it sounds like she's a woman of depth. How about we find something that celebrates both her sharp wit and her elegant taste?" I suggested. We spent the next few minutes discussing his mother's likes and dislikes, her hobbies, and her style. The more we talked, the more I realized how easy and natural it felt to converse with James. He had a way of making every topic interesting and every joke funnier. Eventually, we settled on a beautiful pendant that was both elegant and quirky. It was a small, silver piece with an intricate design, but the centerpiece was a tiny, whimsical figure that seemed to dance in the light. "Anna, you're a lifesaver. I would have been lost in here for hours without your help." "How can I thank you?" James said, his relief evident. "How about you save me from having to cook dinner tonight?" I joked, half hoping he'd take the bait. James's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Dinner it is. There's this cozy little Italian place I know." "How does that sound?" "It sounds perfect," I replied, my heart skipping a beat. We exchanged numbers and made plans to meet up for dinner. As I left the shop, the pendant securely in James's bag, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. In a sea of mundane days, this chance encounter felt like a breath of fresh air. The evening air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the end of summer and the start of something new. I stood outside James's parents' house, my palms sweaty, rehearsing my greeting. "Nice to meet you." I practiced under my breath, trying to sound confident, not realizing that no amount of rehearsal could prepare me for the Carters. James opened the door with that familiar, warm smile. "Ready?" he asked, sensing my nervousness. "As I'll ever be," I replied, trying to muster a smile. We stepped into the living room, and that's when I saw her, Mrs. Carter. She sat regally in her armchair, her cane resting against her leg, her eyes scrutinizing me like a hawk. Mr. Carter sat beside her, a silent, almost invisible presence. "Mom, Dad, this is Anna," James introduced. "Nice to meet you," I said, extending my hand. Mrs. Carter looked at my hand and then at me, her gaze piercing. "Sit, dear," she said, her voice firm, ignoring my hand. We sat, and an uncomfortable silence filled the room. I could feel Mrs. Carter's eyes on me, examining, judging. James seemed oblivious to the tension, or maybe he was just used to it. "So, Anna," Mrs. Carter began, her tone casual yet loaded. "James tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting." "Yes, it's quite rewarding. I love working with numbers, finding solutions," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. She hummed, unimpressed. "And your parents, what do they do?" I explained, but with each answer, her questions grew more personal, more probing. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interrogation. James remained silent, his occasional attempts to change the subject quickly overridden by his mother's pointed questions. "Tell me, Anna, how much do you earn?" Mrs. Carter asked, her tone casual but her intent clear. I was taken aback. It wasn't a question you'd expect in a first meeting, and certainly not in such a straightforward manner. I glanced at James, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. "It's a decent amount. It allows me to live comfortably," I answered vaguely, feeling my cheeks flush. "I see. And this house of yours, you live there alone?" she continued, her curiosity unabashed. "It was my grandmother's. I inherited it," I replied, feeling more like I was in a job interview than meeting my boyfriend's parents. Mrs. Carter nodded, her expression unreadable. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of discomfort. Mr. Carter remained silent, his presence almost ghost-like, while Mrs. Carter's questions lingered in the air, sharp and unnerving. As we left, James seemed pleased. "That went well, don't you think?" he said, oblivious to the undercurrents. "Sure," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. As we drove away, the weight of the evening settled on my shoulders. Mrs. Carter's intense scrutiny and pointed questions lingered in my mind, a stark contrast to the warmth and ease I felt with James. James and we were in love, sure, but marriage wasn't on my immediate bingo card. Yet, there we were, standing in my living room, the same one I grew up in, talking about forever. "Anna, I know it's soon, but I feel it, you know?" "Why wait?" James said, his eyes full of that earnestness that first drew me to him. I hesitated, the image of Mrs. Carter's scrutinizing gaze flashing in my mind. "James, your mom, that dinner was intense. Are you sure we're ready for this step?" He took my hands in his, a comforting warmth spreading through me. "Anna, I love you. And yeah, my mom can be a bit much, but don't worry, we'll handle it together. You and me, okay?" His words were a balm, soothing away the doubts. "Okay," I whispered, the word a leap of faith. We decided on a simple ceremony. No grand gestures, no elaborate fanfare, just an intimate gathering of close friends and family. It felt right, true to who we were. But as the day approached, the butterflies in my stomach weren't just from bridal jitters. The wedding was beautiful, a small affair in my backyard. The same trees that witnessed my childhood games now stood witness to my vows. But amidst the joy, there was an undercurrent of tension, an unspoken question hanging in the air: how would the Carters fit into this new picture we were painting? James sensed it, I could tell. As we danced, his hand on my waist, mine on his shoulder, he leaned in. "Don't worry, love. We'll make it work. You, me, and yes, even my parents." I smiled, a mix of hope and apprehension. "Promise?" "Promise," he affirmed, sealing it with a kiss. But promises, I'd learn, are fragile things. The reality hit home when James and I moved into my grandmother's house. It was a quaint place, its walls holding memories of a lifetime. The ramps and low steps, once installed for my grandmother's convenience, now stood as silent testaments to her struggles and strength. "Your grandma had it all figured out, huh?" James remarked one evening, his gaze trailing over the seamless design. "Yeah, she did. She wanted to be independent, no matter what, I said, a hint of pride in my voice. It wasn't long before Mrs. Carter came to visit. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, took in every detail of the house. The way she moved, slowly, deliberately, her cane tapping against the floor, it was like she was marking her territory. "This is a nice place, Anna." "Very accommodating," she commented, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. I forced a smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Carter. We like it." But her next words sent a chill down my spine. "It's difficult, you know, living in a place that doesn't understand your needs. I think I'd be better off here." The statement hung in the air, a silent ultimatum. James, ever the peacemaker, tried to navigate the treacherous waters. "Mom, we can discuss this later. Let's not jump into decisions." But the decision, it seemed, was already made. In her mind, Mrs. Carter had found her new abode. And as I looked into James's eyes, searching for the reassurance I so desperately needed, I realized that our swift marriage was about to face its first real test. The day the Carters moved in, the house changed. It wasn't just the extra shoes by the door or the additional toothbrushes in the bathroom. It was like the air itself shifted, dense with the weight of their presence. I was in the kitchen, trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my pantry, when Mrs. Carter hobbled in. Her cane clicked against the floor, a sound that was quickly becoming the soundtrack of my life. "Anna, dear, I was thinking," she started, her voice cutting through the silence. "This shelf is too high. I can't reach anything. You should rearrange it." I bit my lip, holding back a sigh. "Sure, Mrs. Carter. I'll take care of it. And another thing," she continued, oblivious to my growing frustration, "Mark and I should take the bedroom downstairs. It's just too much for me to climb up and down." "But that's our bedroom," I protested weakly, the reality of the situation sinking in. She gave me a look, one that said my comfort was secondary. "Well, it's just practical, dear. You're young, you can manage." Before I could respond, Mr. Carter entered, his presence like a shadow, always there, but never quite tangible. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his voice neutral. "Just discussing some adjustments," Mrs. Carter replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. As they left, I felt a surge of resentment. My home, my sanctuary, was being dismantled, piece by piece, and I was expected to smile and nod. The days that followed were a blur of demands and critiques. Mrs. Carter had an opinion on everything: how the furniture should be arranged, what meals should be cooked, how the house should be cleaned. And every evening, James would come home to a battlefield, his attempts to mediate often ending in heated arguments. "Anna, we need to be understanding. They're adjusting," he'd say, trying to calm the storm. "Adjusting? James, they're not adjusting, they're invading. This is our home, not a hotel for your parents," I'd retort, my patience wearing thin. But the breaking point came one evening, over dinner. Mrs. Carter had made some offhand comment about the meal, how it wasn't to her liking. Something inside me snapped. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're used to things a certain way, but this is my home too. I'm doing my best here," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. She looked at me, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Your best isn't good enough, dear. Maybe if you spent less time at that job of yours and more time here, things would be different." I looked at James, desperate for support, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on his plate. In that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. I was an outsider in my own home, my life hijacked by the unwelcome presence of the Carters. The tension in the house was like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Every morning, I woke up to the same routine: prepare breakfast for 4, rush to work, then come back to a list of complaints and demands. It was like living with a ticking bomb, never knowing when the next explosion would be. One evening, I was in the kitchen, trying to juggle preparing dinner and responding to a flurry of work emails when Mrs. Carter came in, her cane tapping a steady, irritating beat on the floor. "Anna, this kitchen is a mess. And what's for dinner? I hope it's not that bland chicken dish you made last week," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. "I'm doing the best I can, Mrs. Carter. And it's pasta tonight." She sniffed, making it clear what she thought of my best. "You know, if you weren't so tied up with that job of yours, maybe you'd manage the house better." That was it. The final straw. I turned to face her, my hands trembling with frustration. "Mrs. Carter, I'm working this job to support us. And I'm also trying to manage the house. I'm only one person. I can't do everything." Her eyes narrowed. "Well, maybe you should consider working from home then. That way, you can keep an eye on the house and still do your job." I was flabbergasted. Work from home? Just so I could clean up after them and cook on demand? The thought was suffocating. "James and I have been talking, and we think it's the best solution," she continued, as if reading from a script. I felt a surge of anger. "You've been talking? And what about me? Don't I get a say in this?" Just then, James walked in, and I turned to him, hoping for some support. "James, please tell me you don't agree with this." He looked uncomfortable, caught between his mother and his wife. "Anna, it's just... Mom has a point. It would make things easier." "Easier? For whom? Certainly not for me." I felt like I was drowning, and the people who were supposed to throw me a lifeline were instead pushing me further under. "James, this is not about making things easier. It's about respect and boundaries. Your parents moved into my house, and now they're trying to dictate how I live and work. This is not okay," I said, my voice rising with every word. Mrs. Carter interjected, her tone patronizing. "Anna, dear, we're family now. We should be helping each other, not arguing over trivial things." Trivial things? My job, my independence, my sanity, were these trivial things? I looked at James, searching his eyes for the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me. But all I saw was indecision, a man torn between his wife and his mother. Under the relentless pressure from Mrs. Carter and the passive compliance of James, I found myself boxed into a corner with no escape. The air in the house was thick with my silent acquiescence as I reluctantly agreed to work from home. Each day melted into the next, a monotonous blend of keystrokes, cooking, and cleaning, all under the watchful, often disapproving, gaze of Mrs. Carter. James, for his part, seemed blind to the imbalance, content to let the scales tip ever in favor of his parents. Then came that fateful evening, the one where the weight of my silence became too heavy to bear. We were gathered around the dinner table, the air heavy with the scent of the meal I had spent hours preparing. Mrs. Carter was mid-complaint about the seasoning of the chicken when I finally found my voice. "I'm tired," I said, the words falling from my lips like heavy stones. "I'm tired of trying to balance work and taking care of everyone's needs. Maybe it's time we considered living separately." The words hung in the air, a fragile bubble of hope destined to burst. Mrs. Carter paused, her fork mid-air, her eyes locking with mine. Then, to my utter disbelief, she nodded. "I agree," she said, her voice smooth as silk, her tone matter-of-fact. "This arrangement isn't ideal. But this house, it's so well equipped for our needs. So, Anna, it would make sense for you to find another place." The room spun, her words a gut punch that knocked the air from my lungs. I turned to James, desperate for him to intervene, to stand up for us, for our home. But the man I looked to for support merely echoed his mother's sentiment. "Mom's right, Anna. This house suits their needs. You can leave here if you like," he said, his words slicing through the last tether of my restraint. His words, so casually delivered, were the culmination of 1,000 tiny betrayals. The man I loved, the man I had built a life with, was offering up my sanctuary, my grandmother's legacy, on a silver platter to appease his parents. Without a word, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and final. I could feel their eyes on me, wide with surprise, as I pulled out my phone and dialed the number I had looked up just moments ago, my fingers steady, my resolve unwavering. The room was silent except for the muffled voice on the other end of the phone. "Yes, I need to schedule a move," I said, my voice clear and loud enough for everyone to hear. A look of triumph flickered across Mrs. Carter's face, a smug smile curling her lips as she mistook my actions. She thought I was conceding, retreating from my own home. But the reality of my words hadn't hit her yet. I turned to face her, my eyes locking with hers. "Mrs. Carter, you seem to be misunderstanding the situation. The movers aren't for me. They're for you, your husband, and James. You have until the end of the day to pack your things and leave my house." The silence that followed was profound, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. Mrs. Carter's face drained of color, her triumphant smile faltering, transforming into a mask of disbelief and shock. But this is our home now. You can't just throw us out," she stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of outrage and fear. "This was never your home. You imposed yourselves, and your son allowed it. But I'm reclaiming what's rightfully mine," I replied, my voice unwavering. James was on his feet now, his face a mixture of confusion and desperation. "Anna, please, let's talk about this. You don't need to do this. We're a family." The word family hit me like a slap in the face. This was not how family treated each other. This was not how love manifested. "James, a family respects each other. A family supports each other. What happened here was manipulation and disrespect. I'll have the divorce papers sent to you tomorrow," I said, the finality of my words sealing the fate of our marriage. Mrs. Carter started to cry, her sobs a cacophony of disbelief and loss. James tried to plead, his words a jumbled mess of apologies and promises. But it was too late. The decision had been made, the line drawn. The day after the movers had cleared out the last of the Carters' belongings, I stood in the middle of my living room. The sun streamed through the windows, its light touching every corner, every surface, as if to cleanse the space of the heavy shadows of the past months. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the constant noise and tension that had become my daily reality. I wandered from room to room, each step feeling lighter than the last. The house was mine again, my sanctuary, my refuge. I could breathe, truly breathe, without the weight of their expectations suffocating me. It was in this moment of solitude that the doorbell rang, a gentle chime that seemed too loud in the quiet of the house. I opened the door to find my friend Sarah standing there, a warm smile on her face and a casserole dish in her hands. "Heard you might need some company and comfort food," she said, stepping inside. We made our way to the kitchen, the aroma of the casserole filling the space, a scent of normalcy, of home. As we sat down at the table, Sarah reached for my hand, her touch grounding. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I took a deep breath, the future a blank canvas before me. "Now, I start over. I rebuild, on my terms. It's daunting, sure, but also liberating." Sarah nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding and support. "You know, sometimes the best beginnings come from the hardest endings. You've got this, Anna. You're stronger than you think." Her words resonated, a gentle reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the storm. "I guess it's time to find out what I'm really made of," I said, a tentative smile on my lips. The conversation flowed, the comfort of old friendship wrapping around me like a warm blanket. We talked about everything and nothing, the laughter and chatter a balm to my weary soul. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized that this was more than just a new beginning. It was a chance to rediscover myself, to redefine my boundaries, to live my life unapologetically.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked. We could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.